Hey everybody, one of your internship coordinators here. And for this video, we're going to be going over your chapter 2 reading, the collisions and impact force article that you were reading out of your dossier, along with some of the annotations that you have hopefully created. So some big things that we need to review. Number one is what this whole idea of impact force and collisions is all about, and some key points that you should be considering and thinking about when it comes to designing your drop pod ideas. So let's go ahead and get into it. So obviously the title of the article was Collisions and Impact Force. So hopefully we have an idea of what an impact force is. If you're looking at the screen, you'll notice that the basic definition is here. And we're going to use this example with our tennis ball here, kind of to help make connections between what an impact force is, how it applies to some of our key points, and then what that means for our drop pod again. So an impact force, if you can think of it on your own, great. If not, it's the push exerted on one object when it has a collision with another object. So this is any impact between any forces. This is just one of the pair of equal-sized forces in a collision. So if we're applying this definition to the tennis ball here, you'll notice the tennis ball, as it drops, it collides with the ground. So in this case, there's going to be a push exerted on the ground from the tennis ball, creating that collision. And there's this equal-sized force from the tennis ball and the earth coming together to create that collision. So hopefully that tennis ball gives us an idea of what an impact force is when comparing it to a tennis ball. Now, within the article, there are a lot of key points that hopefully are going to help guide the creation of your drop pod design. One of them is that when an object falls and hits the ground, that collision occurs. So the ground is going to exert a force on the object, and the object exerts a force on the ground. We know this. So when our pod drops, think to yourself, how is that going to impact how I design my drop pod? Because that's a very important thing to remember. Another key point is increasing the time over which a collision occurs decreases the damage to an object because it spreads out the force over a long period of time. So the longer we can kind of prolong that collision, the less damage there's going to be, or at least we're going to decrease the damage, and we're going to be able to spread it out all over a long period of time. So notice again our tennis ball here. As it collides, the tennis ball will actually change shape to fit the form, that flat form of the ground, which allows it to, again, increase the time. So time's going up for how long the collision occurs and decreases the damage. And we know that there's very little damage because you can hit a tennis ball over and over and over again. It's still going to retain its shape. It's still going to continue to bounce. So thinking about that, how can I increase the time that a drop pod occurs so that we can decrease the overall damage? Okay. So the other two ones we want to look at is after impacts with the ground, the velocity of a pod can change to zero. So when something impacts with the ground, you're going to see the velocity change to zero. It's going to do that rather quickly. And for our drop pod idea, that's important because, again, we got to take into consideration damage, all of those exerting forces, and how we're going to fit the criteria of our overall design. The last big key point is collisions involve a force acting between the objects for some amount of time. We know there's going to be some amount of time between the collision of our drop pod and the collision of the ground. And we need to figure out how we're going to manipulate and change the amount of time it takes for that collision to occur. So you've seen the definition for impact force in action with our tennis ball. You've seen some of the key points. So the last question I'm going to pose to you is, how would you begin to design your drop pod, and what are some things that you need to consider? Brainstorm some ideas, think to yourself what you would do, and at this point, we've wrapped up our conclusion and our review. If you have any questions, reach out to your individual instructional coordinator. Otherwise, good luck.